When I was approached to do Fistful of Dollars, there was no such thing as a spaghetti Western. There were a few Westerns that had been made by Italian companies, a few small ones, but they were never dubbed that particular thing. That came later on. In fact, I think it was the Japanese, they used to call them, in order to segregate the American Westerns from the Italian-made ones. They called the Italian ones macaroni Westerns. And so that's how that came about. In fact, the idea of making a Western in Italy sounded odd, but then it turned out, well, we're going to make it in Spain, and the terrain in Spain it's very much like Arizona in some spots or parts of California. When I was first making Fistful of Dollars, it was a Western version, a Western remake of Yojimbo, and I always loved Yojimbo, so that's what inspired me to take the project. I always thought at the time, this thing will either do really well or it won't do anything. Probably the latter. I thought this thing's going to really bomb out, but I'm going to get a trip to Italy and Spain. I've never been to either place. It's going to be a fine experience. And if it did something, if the dice came up 7 or 11, it would be just a bonus deal. So I just went and made the trip, worked the best I could on it. Well, it's true. I did bring a lot of my own equipment. I just bought some jeans. I brought the boots I wore on rawhide, and brought mostly wardrobe with me. We picked up a few things in Spain. Unlike an American film or a film anywhere that is on a more modest to high budget, you would have duplicates and triplicates of anything in case something got lost, in case something got damaged. We had nothing. I had one hat. If I lost that hat, I was a goner. There was no way to match up to anything else. So what I did is I took my wardrobe home at night. I took it back to the hotel. I took the hat and the poncho, which we only have one of. The stuff that I brought over had triplicate, but the stuff we bought over there, we didn't. Sergio didn't speak any English, and I didn't speak any Italian when I first went over there. He knew goodbye, and I knew arrivederci, and that's about it. So we had a wonderful woman from Poland who had been working for Constantine Films, and she spoke many, many languages and Italian fluently, and she sort of represented Constantine in Italy. So she interpreted, and her English had been learned by Americans after World War II. So she knew American-style English with all the slangs and what have you. A friend of mine in Rome said, oh, they're going to lose the track. They just do a guide track there. They don't pay too much attention to it because they're going to loop everything later anyway. So they said, be sure and keep track of any changes you make because they're going to lose the guide track. And they did, sure enough. A year or so later when I was looping Fistful of Dollars, a few dollars more to come out in this country, I had to go back to my own notes. I'd make up a lot of stuff anyway. And we just all kind of do the scenes and whatever the intent was. But you did have to keep track of it because you're going to loop it later. The efficiency level is certainly not as good as it is with an American crew or a British crew or even Italian crew today. We were shooting in Almeria, and he needs a tree for a hanging tree with a noose on it. He just wanted a tree with a noose, a symbol as I ride by. This is back on Fistful of Dollars. He couldn't get a tree. There was an old tree that was in somebody's yard. It was dead, but it was in somebody's yard. And so all of a sudden, the guy, they go in, he sends a crew in, and they cut the tree down at the guy's yard. Well, the guy comes out the front door and says, what are you doing, cutting down a tree? And he says, oh, we're from the highway department. This is a danger. This tree might fall on the road, so we're taking it out. And the guy kind of went, oh, okay. But that's the kind of creativity he'd use. And we were once shooting in a few dollars more, and he wanted a crane. We didn't have a crane. We couldn't afford a crane on these pictures. But the De Laurentiis company had a crane nearby. In the summertime in Spain, they have a Catholic holiday about once a week. There's a different holiday. Well, there was a Catholic holiday coming up. So, and the De Laurentiis company wasn't going to be able to shoot, being an Italian company, a Catholic-oriented group. But Sergio went to the bishop and said, "We're not Catholics. We're a Jewish company, and we're over here shooting this film, and we're not Catholic. So could we film that day?" So the bishop gave his permission. Sure, you guys can go ahead and film. So we went to De Laurentiis and said, "You can't film, but we're going to film. Can we have your crane?" So he borrowed the crane. It was a great experience to look back on. But at the time, it was kind of funny. I mean, now it's very funny.
The westerns done by other directors at that time were cheap films. I was the one who started the Italian westerns, and my films were cheap too. The ones before Sergio Leone. So there was no outstanding western or director better than Sergio Leone at that time, and even later, because the western genre was considered as the intellectuals as something cheap, not worth doing it. While Sergio Leone loved them, and I loved the western. I was a lawyer before becoming a film producer. I wanted to be involved and become a film producer, so I made a search, a market search, and I found out from this search that the audience liked, 80% of the audience liked the westerns. 80%. At that time, I also realized that the Americans were making like a couple of westerns every couple of years. So I thought that for the law of the demand and the offer, if I made a pretty good western, it would be successful. There were also very important reasons why they were shot in Spain. The cost of shooting in Spain was 25% of the cost of shooting in Italy. 25%, 1/4.
For me, work with Leone was, for a screenwriter and director, it's like marriage. You find the guy with you can share your ideas. You have the same wavelength. I met Sergio when he was just kind of adventurous assistant director. I was 22. I wrote 3 thrillers in a row. I published 3 thrillers in a row, and he read them, and we found a nice understanding. And he contacted me. It was a little tricky, and I was fascinated by his intelligence and talent, but I was a little scared of the movie people, And I did go to Milan to work in advertising, and he kept calling me on the phone and say, "What are you doing there? Come here." And one day he called me. He said, "Go to see a Kurosawa movie called Yojimbo." I said, "Why?" I said, "Because it could be a Western, Italian Western." I can't believe that. I was just married. I told my wife, "It's called this Leone now. Tell me I'm not at home." And so I've lost this chance. But he called me again to rewrite something in for a few dollars more.
His childhood drove him to making Westerns. That's the only thing he wanted to make. And in fact, what he did was he copied Kurosawa, the famous Japanese director, on Yojimbo. He saw Yojimbo maybe 100 times. And he ran in a moviola when he was doing the script. And he would run the scene over and over and over and stage it more or less the same way that Kurosawa staged it. Now, you can't go wrong. Charlie Bronson was the exact actor he wanted. The look, the strength, he emanated enormous power. Charlie told me he turned it down. He said, "I'm making an Italian picture about a Western." He didn't even read the script. He ruled the day, of course.
Clint was very, very smart. It was like in the movies, silent, and you couldn't understand what he had in his mind, really. And I never imagined he was so talented, really. Because Sergio used to say jokingly that he had 2 expressions, with a hat and without a hat. But he was very smart.
Leone created that kind of hero who was silent and visual. I mean, Clint Eastwood was a very sweet, soft-spoken, nice guy when I saw him in Rome. He took this guy, fit him with a hat and his costume. To him, the costume was essential because His whole idea of a movie is visual, as it should be. What it looks like on the screen was the most important thing to him. That's why they were so good. Jean-Marie Volontè, brilliant actor, very intelligent, and he was the best actor in those first two pictures. He had a career that should have gone way up. I mean, he had everything. He had the looks, the talent, and the emotion, the power as an actor. But he was an intellectual, and he decided not to make any movie unless it fit his political thoughts. He was very left-wing actor. And he turned down a lot of stuff. I mean, really big movies. He wouldn't do them unless he worked with what they called committed directors, meaning they were directors of the left. Serious directors like Francesco Rosi, very good director. I worked with him, actually. And he wouldn't do anything else.
I think that Leone was very conscious to invent spaghetti western. That's a style, that's a new kind of approach to classical kind of movies. So it was loyal to his style, I think. There was a movie theater in Florence called the Super Cinema, where the owner liked this movie and kept on. They show it again in Rome and the other theaters. You know, the word spread, and but you know, the critics until the good, the bad, and the ugly scorned. You know, they were absolutely Western, Italian West. Wow.
Clint helped for the Fistful of Dollars being successful, and for the Fistful of Dollars allowed Clint to become a much better known star.
Leone was a different kind of director, actually, but still, he was enormously loved by movie makers all over Hollywood. All of Europe claimed this movie as the best movie of the year, and in France they show it every year. There was no doubt. This man was part of cinema history.
With Fistful of Dollars in 1964, Sergio Leone not only reinvented the Italian Western, I think he reinvented the Western as well. And in the process, re-energized a genre that had run out of steam, not just in Italy, but in America as well. That Hollywood Westerns were grinding to a halt. The critic Pauline Kael famously wrote that the interest in the Wild West was no longer in the stories, it was in the old guys who played the Western heroes and whether they could still get on a horse or not. You know, whether John Wayne, whether James Stewart, whether Henry Fonda could still get on a horse. So it was a youthful shot in the arm into the Western as a whole. Basically, Sergio Leone had this inspiration of taking Kurosawa's Japanese samurai film, Yojimbo, and transposing it into a Wild West setting in the 1870s. Leone went to see Yojimbo at the Arlecchino, the Harlequin cinema in Rome, big cinema, in Christmas 1963. And he phoned his friends, the director Sergio Corbucci and cinematographers and scriptwriters. You've got to go and see this movie. This is an amazing movie, and it would make a great Western. And Carlo Leone remembers him writing down the dialogue of Yojimbo to see what can be done with this. So there's no question that at that stage they looked closely at Yojimbo, possibly on a moviola machine, in order to construct a kind of script. Then they started leaving Yojimbo behind, and they didn't refer to it during the shooting at all. The plot is very similar, but the detail is completely different. The cultural context is completely different. So there's this odd thing of, yes, the structure and the plot are quite close to Yojimbo, with the exception of two big set-piece scenes. But the dialogue, the action, the experience of watching the movie is worlds apart, literally, a completely different cultural experience. The opening credits for Fistful of Dollars were kind of rotoscoped moments of shooting with amplified gunshots and this main title theme by Morricone on the soundtrack. And with primary colours, a bit like an Andy Warhol, where you've got sort of red. And so it's like a sort of pop art version of the movie that was about to come. It was designed by a man called Luigi Lardani in Rome, who did all Leone's credit sequences. But I think the main inspiration was James Bond. You know that you're in for a kind of rock and roll Western immediately because the soundtrack's at full whack and the images are coming at you at full whack in all these primary colours, very fast editing on the rotoscoped images. It was also to raise the curtain on a very new kind of cinematic experience. The choice of Clint Eastwood was very interesting. Leone's first choice was Henry Fonda or James Coburn. The Magnificent Seven had been a huge hit in Italy. Those young stars who were introduced by Magnificent Seven, these were people who would be a real catch. Fonda's agent never even sent him the script. He thought it was so bad. It was a literal translation from the Italian, and it had things like, "We must go to the Hill of Boots," you know. Someone didn't quite twig Boot Hill. And Coburn was too expensive. They were all too expensive. He only had $15,000 to spend on his hero. So one day, the person who ran the William Morris agency in Rome asked him to see an episode of the TV series Rawhide, an episode called Incident of the Black Sheep. Leone even remembered the title of the episode when he told me about this. It stuck in his mind. They watched half of it, and Leone left the room, and he didn't see it to start with. And by Leone's account, he got a photograph, a still of Clint Eastwood as Rowdy Yates, this clean-living, Pat Boone-ish guy in a check shirt. And he got a baro and put a stubble on him, made his shoulders a bit broader, gave him a cigar, made his complexion a bit darker. Yeah. Began to construct the character visually. So they get in touch with Clint Eastwood, who agrees. And it was a hell of a gamble for Clint Eastwood to do this, because you get a letter from someone, yes, he's made the Colossus of Rhodes, but that's it. He's not very well known in America. To go to Spain and Italy to make a remake of a Japanese movie, low budget, $15,000 as a holiday thing. Eastwood contractually couldn't make movies in America. Part of his deal on Rawhide was he couldn't do holiday work, as it were, but he could in Europe. So why not? Let's go to Spain and Italy for a few weeks and see what happens. So it was a huge gamble. Clint Eastwood arrived at Fiumicino Airport. He wasn't actually met by Leone. He was met by a director called Mario Caiano. For some reason, Leone didn't want to meet him. Caiano spoke English. Eastwood had in his suitcase the grips of the Colt 45 with metal snake on them from Rawhide and the gun belt. He also had the blue shirt and the shrunk-to-fit San Francisco-style jeans. The poncho happened later. It was part of the script, actually, was the Eastwood character getting his poncho. Who contributed what to the character is a great source of debate. Visually, it was a mixture of Eastwood bringing things to Rome and Leone adding to it. But the Eastwood persona, which has lasted for the last 30, 40 years, starts here. The throwaway lines, light on his feet, the sort of cat-like character who is capable of being very tough. He squints a lot, and Clint Eastwood said it was because the Spanish sun was so bright. Couldn't quite see what was going on. All that gets constructed during Fistful of Dollars. Again, it's an apprentice thing, that it isn't fully fledged, it isn't mature as a character. And they begin to get in sync with one another. Then they started molding the character, and Eastwood started cutting lines a lot because he found that he was too talkative. He's one of the very few actors in history who actually fought to speak less lines. Most people are falling over themselves to get more lines, but he wanted less, and he was right. The enigma, the magic, the enchantment of the character is that you don't know much about it. He's a closed sort of character. The visor is down. So, yeah, it suited everyone to strip this character down and not make it too vocal. Gian Maria Volontè, who plays the bad guy in Fistful of Dollars, Ramon, was a theatre actor who'd made his name in Shakespearean roles. He played Romeo at the Arena di Verona in the open air, this great arena where actually Buffalo Bill's Wild West show had appeared in the late 19th century. Big, big arena. He was a graduate of the Academy of Dramatic Art in Rome, and he was a big performer, classical actor. And he'd made one or two movies since graduation, but he was too big for cinema. It was like, some people say about Laurence Olivier's performances in movies. He's too big, and somehow he wasn't thinking it out as a movie performance. So it was quite a risk to cast him as the bad guy, but it was a deliberate risk, because the idea was to contrast two radically different acting styles. The underplaying and the silence and the style and the tightness of the Eastwood character, as distinct from this throwing his arms around, hell's a poppin', shouting, and oh, Ramon, Ramon, and the laughter, and, the sort of ebullience of the Mexican bad guys. And it works brilliantly, actually, this contrast. It's big versus small. It makes Eastwood seem even more enigmatic and stylish. The behavior of the bad guys is all there to enhance the stature of the hero. Leone uses close-ups and portraits of faces in a fairly distinctive way. It actually resembles Fellini's use of faces, and it's very, very different to the Hollywood use of faces at the time. I mean, traditionally, if someone says something, you get a close-up of the reaction, so you know what that character's thinking. You go back to the master shot, the story goes on. But these aren't reaction shots anymore. They're pieces of design in a sequence where you get a big, big face, perhaps with a scar or a bit of stubble or something distinctive about it. And they're portraits, they're lit portraits, usually lit with Renaissance lighting style, and cut to the music. So the faces are just part of the design. They're not reacting to anything, you're just there. It's the face as work of art in its own right, rather than the face as reactor in conversation. Leone didn't have much of a legacy in that area. His use of close-ups remains very distinctive, and there aren't, unless you're parodying Leone, there aren't many people who actually make movies like that. Techniscope, this letterbox, apparently looks like CinemaScope, but is in fact a kind of poor man's CinemaScope. The cheapness of it was that you could print 2 frames for the price of 1. It's called 2P, 2 perforation Techniscope. And while they were making Fistful of Dollars, they realized that it could do extreme close-ups and keep them in focus. A real close-up. I mean, Leone already had in the script PPP, extreme close-up, of some of these characters, these famous physiognomies that he was so interested in. Massimo Dallamano, the director of photography on Fistful of Dollars and A Few Dollars More, put the camera right in for these close-ups, and the trademark close-up emerged. It's interesting. In Leone's previous film, Colossus of Rhodes and The Last Days of Pompeii that he'd worked on, there is none of that. It all starts with Fistful. It's a mixture, I think, of a great director of photography and a director. What are the possibilities of this technology? And one of them is the big close-up. In the case of Fistful, from here to here. But later it would be here, where you go right in on the eyes. Every movie made in Italy in the 1950s was post-synchronized. It was the tradition. On the set, you get all these international characters appearing, speaking their own language, a sort of babble of monoglot actors. So the West German actors speak German, the Spanish actors, the American actors, they usually speak their own language. And then the voice track will be put on afterwards, depending on the country that it's to be released in. So, you know, there were West German actors in Fistful of Dollars, so for the German version, it's dubbed into German. There were Spanish actors in Fistful, it would be dubbed into Spanish and into American. A lot happened at the dubbing stage. In fact, very often the script was changed quite dramatically at the dubbing. You can do what you like, because the lips are going like this most of the time. So you can put all sorts of words on. You'll notice there's a lot of wheezing laughter in Italian westerns, particularly from the Mexican heavies. This is usually because they'd run out of words. So somebody's saying, hello, how are you? Oh. You know, just to fill out the phrase, really, because it was slightly crude. You couldn't stretch words in those days in the way that you can on a computer. You know, the words were spoken by human beings. That's one implication of post-synchronization. The other, of course, is you could treat the soundtrack as a piece of design like the visual design of the movie. So you can lay natural sounds on. You can lay music on. You can really play around with the soundtrack in a very creative way. And I think that was a big contribution of Leone's cinema, that he once said that the sound was 40% of the experience of the movie. Take a moment of violence, a gunshot that sounds like a mortar, but it's only a Colt. Bang. Silence. Horse whinnying. Dust. And it all builds up into a kind of symphony of tension through natural sounds. And superimpose on that Ennio Morricone, and you've got a really distinctive piece of sound design. So post-synchronization, creative opportunities in the dubbing studio, and Leone would spend hours there. Put in a cock crowing there, put in a bird there, put in a scrunching noises, and it becomes almost abstract, a symphony of natural sounds. One of Leone's trademarks in the Dollars films was taking the Western heroine out of the Western. And when asked about this, he had a series of stock responses. One of them was he had a wife and 2 daughters, so he had lots of women at home, and part of the fun of making movies was to get out of the house. But that was a slight aside, really. He didn't like the way in which the traditional Western heroine was simply there to be had by the hero. He didn't like that. He found that was a digression completely unbelievable. You just didn't have women like that in the Wild West. And he looked at lots of archive photos and discovered that in most of these frontier towns, the women were either whores who, you know, as a service industry were there, or hoteliers or whatever. And the idea of the Grace Kelly character, the school mom, the fragrant Western heroine, he couldn't find any photos of people like that. So that was part of it. But at a deeper cultural level, yeah, there's this Madonna and whore thing, which is, you know, a sort of stereotypical view of women that comes through. That in the case of Fistful of Dollars, Marisol is Madonna. I mean, she is the Virgin Mary, in effect, with little Jesus and her husband Joseph. That's very, very deliberate. But subsequently, in the second and third movie, they're usually whores. They're big, buxom women sitting in hotel foyers, looking very blousy indeed, who immediately flutter their eyelashes and fall for Clint Eastwood. Interestingly, scenes were shot in both For a Few Dollars More and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, with Eastwood in bed with a woman. In the case of For a Few Dollars More, with the hotelier's woman. And in the case of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, with a Mexican woman. But they were cut. As if in some way it diminished this cool, locked-in hero to have a relationship of any sort of that kind. That's one big difference with James Bond. I mean, James Bond goes to bed with everybody who's prepared to go to bed with him, basically. But the Eastwood character is locked in, is self-reliant, is in a suit of armor. And you can't get through that cool. It would diminish that person to have them falling in love with a woman. So he did have difficulty with mature sexual relationships in his films. I mean, I'm undying in my support for Leone's cinema, and I've been flying the flag for it for a very, very long time. But I have to admit that the sexual politics of these films is pretty Neanderthal. What seems to have happened with audiences is that they absolutely loved finding someone they could at last identify with. You've got to remember that this movie was initially pitched at the Italian audience. And the Italian cinema-going audience was very distinct. No television in southern Italy at this time. And the average adult in the south of Italy in 1964-5 went to the cinema twice a week. So, you know, we're talking about a very particular kind of audience. Low boredom threshold, talking throughout the movie, stopping talking when someone gets shot. And then at an arbitrary point halfway through the movie, the projectionist would sort of stop and go and have a cup of an espresso and a cigarette, and there'd be an intermission, possibly two. I think this was an audience that was laughing at John Wayne by now, and they didn't laugh when Clint Eastwood opened his mouth. If you go to a bullfight, the matador strides round in his finery and his cloak, and he stands, he's just like Clint Eastwood in his poncho. It's pure machismo in an absolute technical sense, in the Latin Mediterranean sense. And that went down incredibly well with the audience. And suddenly, every Italian Western hero had to have stubble, had to have a hat pulled over his eyes, had to have an equivalent of a poncho, had to smoke incessantly, which in those days was a symbol of control and masculinity. Today, it's a symbol of weakness, smoking. But then, you're a man if you smoke a cheroot, particularly a Toscano. I defy anyone to inhale a Toscano. That cool, macho, strutting hero fits absolutely with that southern Italian image of manhood and masculinity. Part of the Leone hero thing is that they're not quite invincible. And you've got to have a moment where the hero is completely tested physically to show that not only are they cool, not only are they stylish, they're also tough. So you have to have a scene where they're beaten to pulp by the bad guys who roll with, kick them, slap them, push them around and all the rest of it, so they can rise and resurrect and come back in the last reel, surprise everyone, not even bruised actually. And given the kind of punishment they've been given, you'd think they have a few bruises, a little bit maybe, but not much. It's a sort of rite of passage of the hero that, we know he's tough, we know he's cool, we know he's stylish, we know he's good as a technician with a gun, but now we know he's incredibly physically tough as well. And there's also a kind of sadism about it. It's part of the macho thing. You can walk through fire and come out of it. And my God, his heroes certainly walk through fire. The innovations that came through in Fistful of Dollars are many. Obviously, there's the music, obviously, there's the look, there's the locations in southern Spain. But the greatest innovation was the new kind of hero. That this was no longer the Western hero who says a man's got to do what a man's got to do, or there's some things a man can't ride around, who is a chivalric knight of the plains, played by John Wayne or Randolph Scott or James Stewart. This is someone who works for ready cash. He's on the take. Why are you doing this for us, someone says in the movie. And they only wanted to invent a hero who chimed with mid-1960s youth. Those John Wayne characters seemed a very, very long way away from reality by the mid-60s. And just life wasn't like that. It probably never was, but it particularly wasn't like that by the 60s. And so this new character, he's cynical, he's stylish, but also there's no inner man. You're not interested in his psychology at all. The Western in Hollywood was getting really interested in people's psychology. This is a kind of designer cowboy. All you need to know about him is that he wears brown boots and everyone else wears black ones. It's the hero that you identify with, not because of his beliefs, not because of his values, but because of his style, his personal style, the way he walks, the way he talks, the way he dresses. He's so cool about everything. And the modern action hero begins there. The Schwarzeneggers and the Bronsons and the Stallones and the Bruce Willises in a torn t-shirt, it all begins with that moment where the hero stops being a crusader and becomes a style statement.